And welcome in everybody to another edition of the College Hoop News Podcast. I am your host, as usual, Tony Patelis. Tonight we have another weekly recap, but this is our third weekly recap. A lot of great stuff to talk about tonight. We're going to try to pile it all in about an hour, so we'll see how we do. My guest tonight, I'm sure you're familiar with him, Sean Bock. From HawkeyeInsider.com, which is a part of 24/7 Sports. You can find Sean on Twitter at sbock247. Sean, how are you tonight, my friend?
I'm doing well, Tony. I'm doing well. It's good to be talking about the national college hoop scenes again. I mean, it's always nice covering one team because it makes things a little bit easier. But, I mean, there's nothing like covering just the whole national scope and getting a feel for every team. And, I mean, it's been a good start to the year so far. I'm excited to get this baby rolling. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, no problem. Sean's been on the podcast a few times, and like I said, I'm sure you're familiar. We had a lot of stuff to talk about. It was a really great week. We had the Maui Battle for Atlantis, the Advocare Invitational, so a lot of great stuff. Also, Kansas and Tennessee played last night, which was a great game that we're going to get into. Any opening thoughts, Sean? What was your maybe biggest takeaway from the past week?
I mean, I didn't have really one in particular. I mean, because we're pretty much going to dive into everything. But I thought really just we talk about tiers all the time in college basketball. You got 1A, 1B, and then maybe even 2A, 2B if you want to get fancy with it. But I really think it's safe to say you can put Gonzaga in that 1A with Duke after they beat them in the Maui championship. 1B, maybe have Kansas, Michigan State, Michigan, Virginia, Tennessee, Auburn. Maybe even put a couple more teams. But really after that, it's kind of just a total cluster. You've got a bunch of good teams, which is great for college basketball. I think we kind of see teams that really you're kind of like, oh man, this team is vulnerable on any given night. But so far, I mean, yes, it's still early in the year, but I think you can't really pick out a lot of teams in particular that you're like, oh man, this team can fall on any given night. There's just a bunch of solid teams that can really be at the top of the conference, depending on which conference they are and how good really just the rest of the year goes for them. So I think that's been great so far for college basketball.
Yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of parity, which is what makes college basketball so great and why I love it so much. And like you said, anybody can beat anybody on any given night. So let's get into it right away here. Let's start with the Maui Invitational. Obviously, we had that fantastic final with Duke and Gonzaga, where Gonzaga comes out on top. But I wanted to just talk about a few of these teams individually here to start off. Sean, I know you're big into the Big Ten. Obviously, you cover that extensively. Illinois, they go winless during the tournament, but they did show some good things. They played Gonzaga tough. But I said this on Twitter the other day, their top guys are really good. Frazier, Dosmunu, I think that's how you say his last name. Those guys are really good. That backcourt's fantastic. I just don't think this roster has the depth it needs yet. I still think they're a year away. They really don't have a front court, literally. So I think you got to give Brad Underwood another year to kind of build the roster. But I think they could give a few teams trouble here and there during conference play. What are you feeling about Illinois so far?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I agree with everything you said there, especially when you brought up the point that they could give teams trouble. Because I put out on Twitter the other day when they were going up against Georgetown at home, part of the Gavitt games, that Illinois is going to win a couple games they're not supposed to, especially at home. You don't really see a fan base like Illinois every day, coming out for a team that's not expected to do well at all, kind of fishing in the bottom of the conference, but still come out and provide an electric atmosphere and just really have like a great support system behind that program. And I think that's really going to propel them to a couple wins. And also you mentioned the backcourt. Getting Trent Frazier back was huge. Ayo Dosunmu is going to be a really good player for them. Even Alan Griffin, and then another guy I like too is Andres Feliz. He's picked it up the past couple games, but then the front court too is where just there's so many issues. Georgie Benishvale, however you say his name, he's been good, but it's kind of concerning when a guy like that, 6'9", 6'8", is really your best player and a freshman too, because really coming into the year, a lot of the talk around him was that he could maybe even redshirt, or a redshirt could do him well. I don't think really there was much smoke to that rumor, but I think it was definitely brought up considering how raw he is, but he's done well so far. He looks pretty polished. He's got a nice interior game around the basket. Struggles against kind of taller guys, but really makes up for it at times with his long range shooting. But could have a little bit of inconsistency problems, especially with the foul trouble too. But overall, I mean, this Illinois team, they got pieces. Obviously, it's a good start with that backcourt, but DeMonte Williams too is pretty good off the bench. But man, I just think this Illinois team, I have a tough time seeing them really kind of compete in the Big Ten, like maybe that 8-9 kind of range. Like I would put them more at 9-10. Or I mean not 9-10, more like 12-13 around there, just based off of yes, they have talent, yes, they have some pieces, but really I just think it's going to take a year for these guys to really get accustomed into the system and kind of for Brad Underwood to have a fair assessment of his team, considering they are so young and they have a lot of rawness on their team. There's still some guys from the previous era that are kind of not necessarily Underwood's players. And I think there's a lot to be excited about, but I definitely sense the frustration from Illinois fans, considering they have so much talent, but they're just not winning.
Right. Well, like I said, I just don't think the roster depth is there yet. But I'm excited to see this team in 2019-20. I think that's when maybe you'll see them to start turn a corner. And another team that was out in Maui is Xavier, who's off to a 3-3 start. They lost early at home to Wisconsin, and then they did pull out a game in Maui. They beat Illinois in their final game. They lost, though, to Auburn and San Diego State. San Diego State was a game I thought they should have won. I think they were up by 19 in the first half. I still feel good about this team. They have a ton of new parts, and I just feel like it's going to take some time to click. I think they need somebody to kind of step up and take on that go-to guy role. Is it going to be Najee Marshall? Is it going to be Quentin Gooden? So I just want to see where this team is in a few weeks. I think some people think, this team's going to be a middle of the pack Big East team, but I still feel good about the pieces they have. How do you feel about Xavier so far out of the gate here?
Yeah, I still think they're kind of a team searching for their own identity. I mean, you saw last year they had some scorers in Trayvon Blewett, JP McCurry, two guys that could hit it from the outside. But this year they don't really have that. I mean, Elias Harden's done well so far, but he's only shot 14 threes. Ryan Wellage, grad transfer from San Jose State, is a threat from distance, but I think he's still trying to get a little bit adjusted to that high major kind of play a little bit. And yeah, Quentin Good, I mean, he's been solid too. I mean, turnovers are kind of an issue with him. Same thing with Najee Marshall, Paul Scruggs too. But I like the pieces they have, definitely. And I think you brought up maybe a middle of the pack Big East team. Considering how weak the Big East is this year, as we've seen so far, I think this is kind of good for them. Considering, I think if it were stronger, like most years, they'd kind of be middle of the pack. But I think now that it's a weaker kind of conference, I could see them slipping into maybe a 3, maybe I wouldn't say 2, but maybe like a 3 or 4 kind of range, just based off of, yes, it's a new system, new squads. The coaches are still trying to get adjusted to their roles of players, and that makes it just like a total cluster at the beginning, which makes it tough. But I think really this team's going to get better as the year go on. I wouldn't say they have necessarily a high ceiling, but I think they have a ceiling enough where they could potentially be maybe like a 7-8 seed in the NCAA tournament. But I still think there's a lot of improvement. I mean, the pieces are there, but it's just to see how it'll be a big test for Travis Steele in his first year, no doubt.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. And then, the other team I wanted to talk about real quick is Iowa State. I thought they had a very positive showing. And this is a team playing without, 2 all Big 12 level guys in Cam Lard and Lindell Wigington. So just imagine when those two guys get back, and they're healthy. I think this is going to be a dangerous club. But, you have Michael Jacobson up in the front court who stepped up. He's averaging 17 points and 7 rebounds. And this Talen Horton-Tucker kid has been fantastic. He's just kind of a stat stuffer. What do you think about Ohio State, and have you been impressed with their play so far?
I mean, yeah, Iowa State has looked really good. I'm excited when they come to Iowa City in a couple weeks. Going to check them out live. But Talen Horton-Tucker, man, he is a gamer. I've saw him play a couple times in high school. He's a little misconceiving considering how his like body is a little bit, how he's a little chubby, I guess. But he can play, man. He What I like about this team too is that they got guys like Taylor Horton Tucker who may not be your prototypical point guards, but they can bring it up the floor. They can take guys off the dribble. They can finish down low. Same thing with Mariel Shayok. They can hit it from the outside. Tyrese Halliburton has stepped up too. But yeah, once they get Lindell Wigginton back, I'm interested to see how they kind of fit everybody in. Same thing with Cam Lard. I think they can play him well alongside Michael Jacobson, considering how much of a scoring threat he's really become, kind of around that 15 feet and around the hoop too. So that'll be interesting to see. But I think this ceiling is very high for this Iowa State team. It's kind of crazy, just based off of how low expectations were last year in Ames, and then now this team is really coming along. And there's a chance, even in a Big 12, that they could finish maybe third, fourth. I could vouch even second, based off of how some of the other teams just do this year. But man, this Iowa State team, if I'm a Cyclone fan, I'm really excited just because there's so much young talent mixed with some newcomers that are veterans. So
Right.
that's just been huge for them.
Yeah, the roster's really versatile too. I like the versatility they have, and I think I'm right there with you. I think they're a top four team in the Big 12, and again, just wait till they get healthy. I mean, Wigginton is a Big 12 Player of the Year guy.
Oh
I
yeah,
mean, and they're playing without him right now. And Mariel Shayok is like you said, he's a nice veteran. You can plug into that rotation. So he's leading them in scoring right now at 19 points a game. He's shooting the ball very well. So before we move on here, we got to talk about obviously the championship game, Duke and Gonzaga. Gonzaga wins 89-87, just two heavyweight teams. We're talking top five, both national championship level, clubs. What did you take away from that game? And the one thing I wanted to ask you, Sean, is what do you think? As good as Duke is, as talented as they are, what do you think Duke's flaw is, in your opinion? How do you think you maybe can attack this team, or what do you think their weakness is possibly?
well, I mean, if you watch that game, you kind of saw that Gonzaga played literally the perfect game for, I would say, maybe the first 35 minutes, and the or maybe it was more, maybe 30 minutes. In the last 5 minutes, it got a little dicey when RJ Barrett just decided to go off. But I think with this Duke team, I saw it at the end of the game. You got to remember that RJ Barrett's still pretty young.
Right.
And there was a drive, I think it was on the last one of the game, where he just decided to play hero ball instead of dish it off to an open Zion Williamson, who was right there for an easy put in. Um, so I think with this Duke team, yes, they are very talented. Yes, Zion Williamson, Cam Reddish, and RJ Barrett have a chance to be three of the top five picks in this upcoming draft. But you got to remember how young this team is. And
Right.
I think we also got a good reminder that Trey Jones is going to be a very important piece for them, just because how he kind of brings that leadership role, even though he's so young. But he kind of is just that little glue guy that really um, doesn't have to do much in terms of scoring, but maybe if someone else is struggling or someone else um, is out with fouls or something like that, he can kind of step in and fill that role of scorer, passer, which he already is, and just a playmaker in general. So I don't really know if I can pick out one thing in particular to have to beat this Duke team, because we saw it with Gonzaga. They played literally a perfect game for 36, 37 minutes, um, and they still only won by 2. But I think just in general, there's going to come a time. I know there's a stretch for Duke during ACC play that it's going to be tough for them, and I think they may lose 1 or 2 games there. But I still think this Duke team, I say from a talent basis and just overall, um, is probably the number one team in the nation. But you look at the depth and you're kind of concerned a little bit, considering they can only go 7 deep.
Right.
And it's concerning. I mean, it's concerning now because it's still early in the season, but like we saw with Duke's last national championship team, that Coach K played 7, 8 guys during the tournament and they ended up winning the whole thing. So I think if they can stay healthy, which is always a plus, that they're probably the best team. But I just think right now there's really nothing besides depth that you can really pinpoint about this Duke team that is a huge weakness with them.
Yeah, yeah. No, I agree with you. But I think an injury could really kind of hurt this team, like you
Mhm.
said. So on the other side, though, Gonzaga, when you're looking at rosters, I think Gonzaga is the most complete team in the country. Say outside Kansas. I mean, you just look at this roster. They have size. They have a great point guard in Josh Perkins. They have wings. I mean, just anywhere you look, they have talent on the roster. I think they're a fantastic basketball team. I think they're the number one team in the country right now. They're efficient. They shoot 53% from the floor, 36% from three. They're a really good free throw shooting team. I mean, they're an excellent rebounding team. There's just a lot to like with this club. What impressed you with Gonzaga so far this season and in that game against Duke?
I mean, you said it, just like they're such a complete team. I think it's another thing like Duke that their depth is kind of concerning at times, but I think when you look at kind of their whole roster, I mean, Rui Hachimura has been as good as advertised. He's probably he's making his case for National Player of the Year. Brandon Clark has been really, really good, kind of filling in for Killian Tilly down low. Josh Perkins has been fine. I know there were a lot of concerns with him at the beginning of the year. Um, Obviously, he had that rough game against Illinois, which he had 7 turnovers. But other than that, he's had, I think, over 6 assists in all but one game. He's been solid. Zach Norvell has really taken that next leap, proving he's more than just a 3-point shooter. Uh, I mean, it's still a strength of his, but he's done a much better job creating for himself and taking opponents off the bounce. He's really good in transition too, which helps out Gonzaga, just because they're such a fast-paced oriented team. Just my main concern, I do think Gonzaga is the number one team in the nation, but I wrote this down, made sure I put a star next to it, that my main concern with this team is just playing down to the level of their opponents. Because we saw against a young, scrappy team like Illinois, they almost lost the game because they turned over the ball 22 times and looked all out of sorts. I mean, Illinois, they kind of try to get you out of their rhythm and make sure that really just try to frustrate you in a way, I guess, considering they're not very talented, and that's kind of the way they have to win. But I never thought they were going to lose the game. I never really had that sense. But there's gonna be a time when there's a team like maybe even San Francisco, BYU, some conference team is fired up and hitting on all cylinders, and they're gonna make Gonzaga play on their heels for the rest of the game. And I think that's gonna be a concern too once you hit February, January, and it's kind of slower. You're not really playing on national TV, and you're playing in those, I wouldn't say necessarily full gyms, but gyms that are kind of lower atmosphere a little bit, and you're kind of like, oh man, I'm not that fired up for this game. I mean, the stretch of at Creighton, at home versus Washington, neutral site against Tennessee, and at UNC will give us a better look about this team. That's going to be a huge stretch coming up. But I think the true test will be in January, February, when they're in the conference season. Maybe not playing as good as opponents, but kind of just seeing how they react to maybe opponents that are kind of attacking them because they have the target on their back, number one team in the country, what have you. But I think it'll be interesting to see with this Gonzaga team. I definitely like the makeup they have. I've been a big fan of Rui Hachimura since day one. I knew Brandon Clark was going to be solid, but I didn't think he was going to be this good. But I just think the pieces in general, and Mark Few has proven himself to be kind of a coach that just knows how to develop guys, and really has done a good job with that. I'm excited to see kind of what this Gonzaga team can do.
Yeah, and I think the WCC is going to be a lot better this year. Like you said, like San Francisco looks really good. BYU's played well early on. San Diego's another team I really like. So I don't think, I think they're obviously going to win most of their conference games, but I don't think it's going to be a cakewalk like some people think. So it'll be interesting to see. So let's move on here, Sean. We're going to talk about the battle for Atlantis next. Obviously, Virginia takes away the championship. They beat Wisconsin yesterday. I thought they were extremely impressive. And I think like the difference maker now for Virginia is DeAndre Hunter. I mean, he's been fantastic. He's averaging 16 points a game, almost 7 rebounds. He's shooting the three well, 46%. It gives UVA that third weapon, behind Ty Jerome and Kyle Guy. And we know what Hunter can do defensively. What are your thoughts on Virginia coming out of the gate here and their performance in the tournament?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely like adding DeAndre Hunter. I mean, I know a lot of people bring up last year in the first round, losing to the 16 seed, that he was kind of the difference. I mean, yes, you could see it, but just based off of how well that team, UMBC, played, that really wouldn't be the case. But I mean, Dre Hunter is a very important piece to this team. I like how he works in the pick and roll, how he can pop, how he can roll, and he's a good finisher inside. He's a good shooter on the perimeter. Um, Definitely a versatile player that's gonna a lot of NBA teams like. I think it was good for him to return to college, just from a bias standpoint, considering I love it when those guys stay to develop a little bit. But I think a big piece for Virginia too has been Kihei Clark, the
Yeah,
freshman point guard. I really love that three guard lineup they have with him, Guy, and Jerome. Because yes, Jerome and Guy are good on the ball and they can handle their own. We've seen it in the past, but I really think they look most comfortable playing off the ball. I mean, Jerome's what, 6'5", Kyle Guy's like 6'3". Two very good 3-point shooters. And you know what I like about them when I was watching them closely against Wisconsin is those guys know how to run off screens. Um, they realize when when a defender is maybe hedging too hard or overplaying them. Instead of some guys who kind of just run off the screen to get the ball, they kind of just see where their man is, see how they're defending, and either will reject the screen, go for a backdoor, what have you, kind of reject the screen, just get open and find a way to get those open looks, and they can knock it down too, which has been big. I think when they play against a team like Wisconsin, who we're going to get into next, Wisconsin didn't really do that great job in the first half of kind of disrupting their flow. They kind of let Virginia do what they wanted. And when Wisconsin started to get up in their face a little bit and pressure D, that's when Virginia got a little dicey. I mean, yes, Kihei Clark's a good player, good ball handler, but he's still a freshman. Even if you're the best ball handler in the world, most poised player, Jalen Brunson, even sometimes he had struggles with pressure. And when you have that, you're going to get a little startled. So I think when they're playing in a groove like they were in the first half, they're really tough to beat. But once the pressure starts to hit and they get up in their face a little bit, that's when they're going to have a little bit of struggles. And I think you saw that in the second half against Wisconsin.
yeah. I think the only thing that I kind of noticed with Virginia that kind of not necessarily worried me is they're not kind of like Duke. They're not very deep. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, Tony Bennett was only really kind of playing 7 guys, so that's just something to keep your eye on. Maybe he's gonna, get some of these younger guys more involved sooner than later, but we'll see what happens. And then, Wisconsin. We're gonna get into the Big Ten overall a little later, but are you a believer in this team? Dimitri Trice has played fantastic out of the gate, but he kind of came back down to earth against Virginia. I'm still not necessarily sold on this club. I mean, I think they're definitely going to be better than they were last year, but I just don't. I don't know. When I watch them play, I mean, Ethan Happ's fantastic, but what do you feel about Wisconsin so far?
Yeah, I mean, Ethan Happ, no doubt, probably the biggest headache for Big Ten opponents and just opponents in general. I mean, he's so good. He can do so many things except shoot from the outside. And I just think this Wisconsin team, I think, yes, they're better than last year. I know me and you were probably the hardest people to sell in that Wisconsin team last year at the beginning of the year. But I just don't think I just think when you shut down Ethan Happ and really limit him, yes, it's a tough task, but I mean, when you get a guy with more length and you throw length at Ethan Happ and maybe even a double team, that he kind of struggles a little bit. Yes, he's a good passer out of the post, but still, I mean, this Wisconsin team just relies so much on him. And if something were to
Right.
happen to him in injury, I think this team would really go in a downward spiral. I mean, he's been playing so well lately. Same thing with Demetric Trice. I think those two guys are the only ones in double figure scores. But I think one person in particular that I kind of want to see take that next step is Brad Davison. I mean, last year he showed that he could play on offense, defense, very good scorer at times. I think he had multiple 20-point games. And that was with that shoulder injury, too, that kept nagging him with the brace. And he has that off finally. I know he said preseason that it was probably the best thing is that he's good to go now. But I would like to see him maybe step it up a little bit more. He's averaging around 9 a game. I think for this Wisconsin team to really be that threat in the Big Ten,
Right.
especially how loaded they are or how loaded the Big Ten is, that Brad Davidson needs to be putting up like maybe 14, 15 a night, and really being that second or third guy with Ethan Happ and Demetric Trice. I mean, he's
Well,
good, but we'll see. I think he's really going to be the difference. And I think Nate Reavers is another guy too that's going to have a step up. He played well against Stanford and Oklahoma, but against Virginia, he kind of looked lost. So we'll see. It's just a matter of which guys are going to show up every night. And I think with Wisconsin, considering how kind of the lack of depth and the lack of maybe go-to guys they have, that outside of Ethan Happ, that there's going to be some other guys that really need to step up night in, night out.
yeah, like last year, I think it was just kind of Ethan Happ was surrounded by a bunch of role players, and this year it's kind of the same deal. But Trice and Davidson, need like I totally agree with you. I think Davidson needs to be a 12 or 14 point a game guy, and I don't necessarily know if Trice is averaging 17 points a game right now. I don't think he's that level of a player. Could he put up maybe a dozen or so? Sure. I mean, but I think Davidson and Trice need to be double-digit scorers for this team to be an NCAA tournament team and finish near the top of the conference.
Oh, yeah, 100%. Agree.
Right. All right. So just before we move on here, and again, we're going to talk about the A10 a little later as well. I thought Dayton had some good moments during the tournament. I think Obi Toppin, oh my God, that kid's a beast. I mean, he looks like he's an NBA. He's like ready for the NBA. I mean, you just look at his body. He's already got one of those NBA ready bodies. I liked what I saw against Virginia. They played Virginia really tough. Then they lose to a pretty mediocre Oklahoma team yesterday. So I don't know. I mean, I think out of the gate, Dayton definitely does look like one of the better A10 teams coming out of the gate here. But what do you think about the Flyers' performance at the Battle for Atlantis?
Yeah, I mean, that win at Butler, I'm not sure how much weight that'll have come March,
Right.
but still, I mean, that's a big win against any kind of Big East team, Power 5 team in general, especially just how everyone says the A10 is going to be down this year. Josh Cunningham, when he's healthy, has been playing well, averaging 14.5. And you mentioned it, Obi Toppin, that guy has a very high ceiling. I know there's going to be a lot of NBA guys that are kind of opened eyes about that, but I think this Dayton team will definitely be interesting. I think just when you look at the makeup of the roster, they're not necessarily – they got a good mix. Obviously, Josh Cunningham has been there. Seems like he's been there forever. But they got Obi Toppin, freshman, Trey Landers, Jr. has been playing well. Jalen Crutcher has been solid. It'd be interesting to see with this Dayton team, especially with Anthony Grant in his second year, and just based off how bad I would say the A10 is going to be this year. We'll see. We'll see if they can develop and maybe find a way, or they'll probably, at this point, I would say they're the best team in the A10 and probably make the NCAA tournament with an automatic bid, but we'll see how much really over the season they kind of develop and really kind of figure out things a little bit more.
Yeah, they're definitely a defensive-minded club, but I feel like with all the guys they have, like Cunningham and Toppin and Crutcher, Trey Landers is really good. I feel like they should be better offensively. They haven't started off out of the gate playing good on that end of the floor. They're only averaging about 70 points a game. They're shooting 30% from three, so hopefully they can get it going on that end of the floor, and then they'll look like a lot better club. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I think out of the gate, I'd say St. Louis and Dayton are the two best teams in the A10, but we'll kind of have to wait and see. It's still early. So let's move on here, Sean. We're going to talk about the Advocare Invitational next. Obviously, the Advocare, Villanova wins the tournament today, beating Florida State in a really competitive game. That was very impressive performance, I think, by both teams. But, I think Villanova is slowly getting back on track. I thought they were really impressive during this tournament. I thought Phil Booth played fantastic. Another kid I really like is Demir Cosby-Roundtree. I think he's sneaky good, excellent rebounder. What do you think about Villanova's performance during this tournament?
Yeah, I think the big thing with Villanova, too, we mentioned him earlier in the podcast, is Jalen Brunson, man. They're missing him. They don't have that true point guard that can really kind of rally the troops a little bit. I mean, Colin Gillespie, we thought he was going to be able to take that next step, but he hasn't really proven that yet. Some people forget that he was a D2 prospect going into, I think it was July of his last year of AAU. So, I mean, yes, he's got skills. Yes, he's a good player. I think he's more of a role player, though, and I'm not really sure if he can take that next leap. Javon Quinterly, too. I'm not really sure what the story has been with him.
Yeah, what's
Um,
going on with that?
that's just a weird situation because I mean, you see Jay Wright's getting these 5-star guys, and now he's not playing his 5-star. Like these guys
Right.
come to play right away. I don't know, maybe if it's he's in the doghouse or what's going on, like an injury they're hiding, but it's just weird because we kind of thought he'd fit in. Obviously, he's not going to be Jalen Brunson from day one, or I don't think you can. I think Jalen Brunson comes around once in a lifetime, but still, I think Javon Quinterly was going to be able to fill that gap of kind of a floor general and kind of just a scorer and just a go-to guy from the point guard position. I mean, Phil Booth is solid, but I don't think he's really the guy you want leading your team. More of a combo guard, I would say. Um, but I think the big key for this team too has been Eric Pascal. I know a couple
Yeah.
people were saying, I know it was kind of a reach, but people were saying at the beginning of the year that he could maybe be one of the National Player of the Year contenders.
Yeah, I didn't
Um,
see that either. I didn't. I don't see that.
yeah, I don't. I mean, he's a good player, definitely
Sure,
talented,
sure.
but he's very important to this team too. Because I mean, you look in the two losses, he had 10 points against Michigan, shot 3 of 13. He had against Furman in the overtime loss, he had 8 points, shot 2 of 11 from 3-point land, and in the wins against Florida State and Oklahoma, he had 15 and 22 against Oklahoma State, and he shot 6 of 10 from three. So
Yeah.
I think really he's just a catalyst, kind of down low and on the perimeter, just because he's so skilled. And really kind of the guy that this Villanova team needs. They don't really have that go-to scorer yet.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I think Joe Cremo, the Albany transfer, he hasn't really made as big of his impact as I thought he would. You know, he's more of a role player. He's averaging 6 points a game, a couple rebounds, but I thought they'd get more from him, although it is still early. But yeah, Pascal is a really good player. I just don't see him as an All-American level player. You know, I just don't.
Yeah, yeah, I don't either. And I think when you look at this roster too, it doesn't help him. I mean, just because there's nothing really. I mean, yeah, I mean, just Pascal. I mean, I could see him. I think this year he definitely has a chance to possibly be one of the Big East players of the year, but that's just
Yeah,
because the conference is so down. But
right.
yeah, I just don't see him as kind of the guy you have as a player of the year candidate.
Yeah, and then on the other side, Florida State. Granted, they lost, but I thought they were really impressive this past week. You know, they're just so deep, and they still have Phil Kofer on the bench, who's dealing with a foot injury. So he's one of their best players. So they're going to get him back soon. And I think Trent Forrest. I think point guard was a big issue for them in the offseason, and just a more of a concern per se. And he's played fantastic. He's a stat stuffer. I think he's their most important player. He might not be their best player, but I think Forrest is their most important player. What are you thinking about Florida State early this season?
Yeah, Florida State has been good. I know Terrence Mann was going to be big for them. He's their leading scorer. I thought another big piece too was MJ Walker, who,
Yeah,
believe it or not, was a former McDonald's All-American. Last year, put up little average numbers. This year, he's a third leading scorer, but he's not a guy that's going to put up 20 a night, 25. He's going to be a guy that gives you a lot of minutes, does a lot of the little things, and will still be maybe every other night or so, give you 15 or something like that. But yeah, you said it with this Florida State team, they're just so deep. Just looking at their roster right now, they got maybe what 8 guys or 9 guys that play more than 11 minutes a game. Um, so it's just so nice with Leonard Hamilton just having that kind of reliability on the guys on the bench behind your starters because your stars aren't necessarily going to be I mean, they're leading scorers, but they're not necessarily studs like some of these other teams like Duke and whatnot. But I still think this Florida State team that's going to help huge in conference play just when it gets to January, February. Um, you see this with this team too. The outside shooting's huge. They like to get up and down. They're aggressive on defense. They like to use a lot of bodies, as we said. So I think that depth is definitely going to be huge and probably put them at the top, maybe top 5 in the ACC. But I think this team is going to do a lot of damage, no doubt.
Yeah, me too. I think Walker, granted, he's not putting up big numbers, but his efficiency is way up this year. Last year, it was very poor as a freshman, but he's a lot better. And this is a team that kind of spreads out their scoring. You're not going to see guys, like you said, scoring 25 points a night. It's going to be more 10 points, 12 points, 8 points here and there. They just have so many guys that can hurt you. I really like this team. Their depth is just ridiculous. Two other teams I wanted to ask you about, Sean, before we move on, just real quick. LSU had a kind of up and down tournament. They got smoked by Oklahoma State today. We're going to talk about Oklahoma State in just a second. But, this LSU team is super talented, but I think people have to remember they're also a really, really young team, very inexperienced. So it might take a while for this team to get clicking. How have you thought about LSU so far this season?
Yeah, LSU is just they're young, but they're super talented. And I
Right.
mean, I think a lot of people were kind of I wouldn't say overhyping them coming into the year, but there was definitely a little bit of I wasn't too sold on this. I mean, Tremont Waters, yes, he's a stud, but he struggled a little bit this year.
Right.
Turnover wise, I think he had 6 today, and then he had 6 the other day as well in back to back games. And look what the results were of those games. They ended up losing. I think another thing too in the front court, Emmett Williams, Naz Reid, two very talented freshmen, but I think they're still trying to get adjusted playing with each other. Coming from schools where they were kind of the man, I know it's a cliche a little bit, but there's some guys where you can kind of just put them into the fire and or put them in with anyone and they'll be fine. But I think with these guys, they're a little bit more I wouldn't say self-centered, but they're definitely used to being the guys on their team down low, just getting the ball, throwing it home, dunking it, what have you, and just being the focal point. I think this has kind of been an adjustment for them, and I think it'll be fine once the year goes on. But I would like to. I think they're still trying to get that mesh a little bit. I know Emmett Williams is really can't really do much outside of 5 feet. Naz Reid's a little bit on the perimeter, but he's kind of a guy that would rather play inside than out. So that's that's a little tough just right there. But yeah, I think this LSU team, if Will Wade can find a way to put things together, I think they got a high ceiling. Um, and kind of I wouldn't say a sleeper team in the SEC, but definitely a team that could sneak up on some people. I know I had them pretty high in my preseason rankings, just based from pure talent perspective. But I think Tremont Waters is going to be huge, and he's really going to have to find that consistency and be like, okay, this is my team. Like, I need to step up and not think about the NBA because I know he was pretty close to leaving. So I think just with that, he's got to just take ownership because I know Will Wade is doing what he can. I know he's a lot of talent, but Will Wade's getting all this talent, but he's got to find a way to coach it. So I think he needs a guy on the floor like Tremont Waters to be that leader and really step up and provide that coaching boost on the floor.
Yeah, and then Oklahoma State on the other side, Mike Boynton, I think, is a fantastic coach. I mean, he took a pretty underwhelming roster last year and almost made the NCAA tournament. And right away this year, they have a really nice resume. They beat a really good Charleston team. Excuse me. They beat Memphis, and then they beat LSU today. So they're off to a really good start. I love Cam McGriff. I think he's a stud. They've had some other guys step up. I think Mike Boynton has done a fantastic job so far at Oklahoma State. I think they definitely picked the right guy for the program. What do you think about the Cowboys?
Yeah, I mean, they got a solid resume. I mean, that Charlotte loss at the beginning of the year obviously hurts them a little bit, but kudos to them for playing on the road um,
Right.
right to start. So that's big. But yeah, I mean, Oklahoma State, I saw a little bit of them today for the first time, and I was impressed. I mean, they put up 90 points. Cameron McGriff went off. Um, I think they definitely need to get the turnovers down a little bit. They're 297th in the country in turnover percentage, which is kind of alarming, but I think they'll figure that out as the year goes on, especially with some of the young players they have on their team. Um, and yeah, I mean, this Oklahoma State team is pretty deep. It looks like it's a lot like it's a lot like Florida State, where they got a lot of guys that can play big minutes. Because I think, let me count real quick: 2, 4, 6, 8, 9, 9 guys who play 10 minutes, or at least 10 minutes. Granted, Mike Cunningham's only played in 2 games. Michael Weathers has missed a game, but still, I mean, that's that's huge. As we've seen in college basketball, yes, some of the best teams have won national championships with 7 8 man rotations. But a lot of the teams during the regular season that can do a lot of damage and be consistent throughout are the ones that are deep. And I know you're not big on analytics, Tony, especially this early in the year. But coming into today, Oklahoma State was last in in the Big 12 according to KenPom. So I mean that just goes to show. I mean, yes, it's early, and KenPom's ratings don't really mean much until maybe early conference play or sometime in December, but still, that just goes to show kind of how talented the Big 12, I would guess, would say be this year, and
Right.
just kind of how loaded it is top to bottom. I mean, I know it's too early to pick seeds or see how many teams talk about the NCAA tournament bracketology, whatnot, but there's a legitimate chance that they could fit in maybe 7 teams or something like that.
Oh, definitely. I'm with you. It's still a top three conference. I think it has a chance to be slightly down this year, but it's still in the conversation with I think the ACC, and I think the SEC is in that conversation this year as well. So let's move on here real quick, Sean. I just wanted to talk about the Tennessee Kansas game real quick. Just a fantastic matchup, between two top five level teams. I think it was a really good coming out party for Grant Williams as well. He had 18 points, 8 rebounds, and 6 assists. I don't think the casual fan kind of knows how good he really is. And on the Kansas side, you had Dedrick Lawson, who I think carried the Jayhawks in that game. He had 24 points and 13 rebounds. I think we know Kansas and can agree that Kansas is a title contender. But do you see Tennessee on that level as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny that you say coming out party for Grant Williams because, I mean, he was their conference player of the year last year, and still a lot of
Right, but
people
he's
are
so
kind of,
quiet.
yeah, yeah, exactly. A lot of people were kind of hesitant, and we're kind of like, who is this guy? Um, but yeah, he was really good. He was dominant down low. If he didn't foul out or have any foul trouble, I think you could say that Tennessee could have won that game,
Yeah.
um, just based off of how well he was doing down low. And Duka Azubuike, who it's painful to see how often he gets in foul trouble. I mean, granted, you can't keep him in for that long because his conditioning is not the best. But I think if Grant Williams, if he's on, this Tennessee team is tough to beat, and more often than not, he's on. Admiral Schofield too played really well, had 21. I really like Jordan Bone at the point guard. I mean, he's under control. Oh my God, he's so freaking fast. He can hit the three. Really leads the break, and I just think this Tennessee team's got. I wouldn't say they're technically deep, but they just got maybe 4 or 5 guys. You could even put Jordan Bowden, Jordan Bone, Jordan Bowden, Grant Williams, Admiral Schofield, even Lamonte Turner can hurt you, can score maybe 10, 15 points on you. And I think that's what's going to make this Tennessee team so deep. And really, now that we kind of seen that Kentucky is not as good as advertised to start, that this Tennessee team has a legitimate chance to be the top team in the SEC this year.
Oh, definitely. And the thing I love too is they pretty much play all juniors and seniors, so it's a really experienced group. And it's a team that I think they got picked to finish 13th in the SEC last year, and
Mm-hmm.
they won a piece of the SEC title. So that was really impressive. Rick Barnes has really kind of turned this program around really quick. And then just real quick, your thoughts on Kansas so far? What are your thoughts on the Jayhawks?
I mean, just Kansas, kind of what we expected so far. I mean, they've probably
Yeah,
played, I wouldn't say, probably the toughest schedule with Michigan State and Tennessee. Two of the two of the tougher teams in the nation. But I think Dedrick Lawson, you mentioned him, was huge against Tennessee. We knew he was going to be good, but I think he's going to be a big piece. Same thing with the Gerald Vick. And another guy I think is going to be huge for them is Davon Dotson. You saw it that Quentin Grimes wasn't really himself against Tennessee. Quentin Grimes looked really good against Michigan State to start off the year, but Davon Dotson, man, that guy is fast. He can do a lot of damage. Score the ball, finish amongst the trees. He hit well from the free throw line, make the right passes. I mean, sometimes he gets a little crazy, a little out of control, and Bill Self realizes that. But I think once you get him more acquainted into your system and what you're trying to do, I mean, granted, he's done a really good job of adjusting this early on in his career. Um, I think he's gonna be good. And I think this Kansas team, I I think it's pretty safe bet at this point to consider them Big 12 champs,
Of
just
course.
so early on in the year. But I think they're definitely gonna be challenged in the Big 12, as we talked about Iowa State, Kansas State, now even Oklahoma State and Texas too. Just so much talent in that conference. I think yes, Kansas is by far the most talented team, but I think it's going to be a tough year for them to keep that crown in Lawrence.
Yeah, and I think it's funny, Dotson has been so good that Charlie Moore, who's a really interesting transfer from Cal, he's barely played much this year. I've already made much of an impact, which I'm very surprised about.
Yeah, he's definitely filled a role, as we saw with Quentin Grimes being out or not playing as much. Charlie Moore played 32 minutes. Um, but yeah, you hit it right on the nose that he's really hasn't made too much of an impact, but I think there's going to come a time that he's going to be a key piece as well. We'll see though.
Yeah. All right, just a few more segments here before we get out of here, guys. I wanted to obviously touch on the Big Ten because Sean covers that. It's off to just a fantastic start. I think Michigan looks fantastic. Indiana looks pretty sharp early on. You had Iowa winning the 2K Classic. Minnesota is another team. I think also Ohio State are two teams that I thought were way too low in the projections early on. They're 11-0 combined. Just give me your overall thoughts on the conference so far, and what do you think about the start?
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna start with Iowa because I mean I'm most familiar with them in
Of
Indiana.
course.
But yeah, man, I mean I'm surprised it's just about everyone else. I was really iffy on the Hawkeyes coming into the year. I honestly thought I was preparing for them to be 0-2 in New York City, um, but they really showed up against Oregon. I mean, Bull's tough matchup. It helped that he went down, but they really controlled the pace for most of the game against Oregon and especially against UConn. They just look really good, just to look really in sort. And I think a big key to that has been Connor McCaffrey, Fran's son, coming back from last year, only played in 4 games, had a bunch of medical issues, but he's really fit in well. I know a lot of people have kind of given him flack because his coach's son, and a lot of people thought he's just a D2 player, and he's only at Iowa because his dad, but man, he's been huge for that team. I mean, he's not going to drop 15 points a night, but he's not even going to drop maybe 6 or 7 assists. He's just going to be a guy that fills a role and kind of fill in spots. You can play him at the 1, you can play him at the 2, maybe even I don't think they'll need him at the 3, but he could play that spot too, just because he's 6'5", he's strong, and he can do so much on the floor, does so much well. And he has pieces around him too. Tyler Cook, Luka Garza have been playing really well. 2 front court players. Joe Wieskamp didn't play well in New York City, which is kind of disappointing, but in the first couple non-conference games, he looked really good. Really was the best player in the opener, to be honest with you. Can knock it down from 3. Jordan Bohannon, I think he's most comfortable off the ball, especially when Connor's playing, because Jordan, yes, he's been great during his now his 3rd year at Iowa, but his previous 2 years. But he's definitely a shooter and a guy that's better coming off screens, kind of the guy in the corner during a driving kick situation or even in transition off the catch. He's been good. We'll figure out a lot more about this Iowa team though in the next coming weeks. Tuesday, they play a crummy Pittsburgh team at home for the Big Ten ACC Challenge. That'll be a interesting game to say the least. Pittsburgh is not very good, but still, it's an ACC opponent. Friday, they host Wisconsin, which will be interesting to see how the two contrasting styles pair up because we know that Iowa likes to get on run. Wisconsin's likes to lure you to sleep. Monday, December 3rd, they play in East Lansing against Michigan State. That'll be fun. And December 6th is a game I'm really excited for when they host Iowa State. If both teams continue to win and play strong, then that's going to be a heck of a game. Just Fran McCaffrey, I mean, he gets flack for scheduling some of his early season scheduling tactics, but he's really challenging this team right away, and I think that's going to be huge for them come March.
Yeah, on paper, I think they're an NCAA tournament team. And the one real quick thing on Tyler Cook, he's playing to his strength. He's being aggressive. He's not settling. He's just driving to the basket a lot. He's only taken 3 3-point shots this year, which I really like. So if they can just play some semblance of defense, which they didn't do last year, I think they're going to have a pretty successful year. And then Michigan, real quick, they've been fantastic. I mean, they look like the best defensive team in the country. Everybody was worried about losing Mo Wagner, but this Iggy Bradzikas kid has come in and stepped in and played fantastic. He's averaging 16 points a game, 6 rebounds, shooting the three at 35%. So not too shabby. What do you think about the Wolverines so far?
Yeah, I mean, Michigan right off the bat against Villanova, that was in itself probably the most dominating performance of the year. I mean, we knew that Villanova, as we talked about earlier, had some flaws with the guys they lost after winning a national championship last year, but Michigan just came in and just beat them down. I mean, they're a team that's going to try and punch you in the mouth. They're going to be in a lot of games this year, no doubt. I don't think there's going to be a game where they lose by 10 or more points, maybe even like 6 or 7, maybe pushing it a little bit, but Beeline's got this team rolling, and it's just a testament to every year people doubt what he has at his fingertips with his teams. But man, like he just proves everyone wrong, and just they compete, man. They're just really good. I mean, Brazikas, I'm surprised how much of an impact he's made right away. Xavier Simpson has been really good. You could even say Charles Matthews, just so his versatility, how he can guard on the perimeter. I like to see his offense pick up a little bit, shooting especially from 3, but he's had a couple strong games against Villanova, George Washington. Hasn't played as well in the last 2 games, which is kind of concerning, but I think he'll pick it up as the year goes on. Isaiah Livers too, Jordan Poole. I'd like to see Jordan Poole take that next step. He played well against George Washington and against Chattanooga, but kind of struggled in the other games. So I'd like to see him be more of a threat from the offensive end, especially from the perimeter, because that's a big strength of his. But I think with this Michigan team, you got a lot of good pieces, no doubt, and they play well together because they're not selfish. But I think once you get past maybe Isaiah Livers and Eli Brooks on the bench, that's where I raise a little bit of red flags. I mean, yes, you got Brandon Johns, David Hujulius, Colin Castleton, Adrian Nunez. Those are solid freshmen, but I don't know if they're ready to step in and compete. I think Johns is the most ready, but I think guys like Castleton and DeJulius and Nunez too are kind of maybe a year or 2 away from competing. So right now, Michigan's only 7 strong, and I think an injury would probably kind of change up a little bit. But like I said, I don't want to doubt Beeline ever again. So we'll see with this Michigan team. I definitely think they can compete at the top of the Big Ten. Right now, I could say they're at first, but I think Michigan State is kind of my top team right now. But I definitely think if Michigan stays healthy, that'll help. But just depth, man, that's just gonna be a concern for me with them.
All right, yeah, I can't wait till conference play starts in the Big Ten, because I think it's such a deep league, and all the teams are kind of jumbled up. I think Michigan and Michigan State are the top 2, but I still like Ohio State. I like Indiana. Nebraska has got off to a pretty good start, so it definitely should be fun. So before we get out of here tonight, I think definitely a hot topic on Twitter has been the start of the Atlantic 10 Conference, off to a very rocky start. The combined record of the conference is 43-39. George Mason is 2-5. They're a team I was very high on. A lot of people were. They're off to a rough start. St. Joe's is 3-3. We mentioned St. Louis, Davidson. They're 5-1, but neither have looked super sharp. Now, mind you, it's very early, but I don't know. I just don't see this being a multi-bid league this year, unfortunately, because none of the teams are really doing any damage in the non-conference, and there's been some really bad losses. UMass lost to Howard. George Mason lost to American. So it's just been a rough start. What do you think about the start of the Atlantic 10 Conference?
Yeah, I mean, the Atlantic 10, I really haven't seen it too much this year, like go in depth with it, but still, like I've watched St. Louis play against Pittsburgh, and that game was flat out ugly. I mean,
Right.
St. Louis they got good pieces. I mean, obviously, Travis Ford is trying to do his best down there. Jordan Goodwin, I think, would be a good player for them. But I think that's kind of concerning when a team like that, I mean, granted, it's still beginning of the year, but man, they just look bad. I mean, they'll have a chance to beat Butler. I think that'll be a big win or a big game for them, no doubt. Um, considering just how Butler is not to the point where they've been in past years, but still a Big East win is huge for a resume, especially in a league that's going to be one bid. I mean, I also think Davidson's pretty good too. Kellen Grady and John Axel Goodmanson, those two are very, very talented together. That is probably the best backcourt duo scoring wise, I would say, in the conference. Dayton too, they got solid pieces that I like. I think Anthony Grant's doing well over there. Josh Cunningham, when he's healthy, is obviously going to be huge for them. VCU is another team too that I kind of saw they might sneak up on a couple people. I know they got a good front court duo down there, but yeah, just the A10, just all the backlash coming at them is just, I don't see how they're a two-bid league at this point.
No, they just haven't done enough damage in non-conference play. And I didn't think the league was going to be strong to begin the year, but I didn't think it was going to be this bad either. You know, I think I had George Mason in like the top 3 to start the year, and you know they look like just a mediocre ball club. So it's just been a rough start, but just wanted to get your thoughts on that. So, all right, that's going to pretty much wrap it up for tonight. Sean, before we get out of anything, do you have anything to plug or you want to mention or anything like that?
I mean, not too much other than there's a couple good matchups this upcoming week. We already touched on Wisconsin at Iowa, but they're big Big Ten ACC challenges. I mean, Indiana at Duke on Tuesday. I think Duke's going to win that one big, but I still think it'll be interesting to see how Indiana responds. They've been hurt. They've struggled a little bit this year to start, but we'll see how they come back. North Carolina at Michigan's going to be a fun game. There's a lot of length in that matchup. Purdue at Florida State, Syracuse at Ohio State, Virginia at Maryland. Those are a lot of fun matchups, and I think they're going to be really interesting between two of the best conferences, I would say, in America.
Definitely. So we'll be breaking down that on next week's weekly recap on Sunday. So certainly will be a lot to talk about. Again, my guest is Sean Bock. You can find him on Twitter at sbock247, HawkeyeInsider.com, part of 247 Sports. Sean, I appreciate you joining me tonight. Thank you so much.
Yeah, Tony, appreciate you having me on.
All right, no problem. All right, so we're getting out of here right now, guys. Tony Patelis, College Hoop News Podcast. We'll be back next Sunday. I will announce my guests in just a few days here, and it should be a lot of fun. Thanks a lot. See you next time.